My grandma on my dad's side left me a $1 million estate, excluding my dad and brother, with my father now threatening legal action unless I share half of the inheritance. She bequeathed me $23 million from her estate, which would have originally gone to my dad, while my brother received $25 million. My brother and I never met our grandpa. My dad always recounted their strained relationship, leading to their estrangement before my birth. He met my mom, 50F, at work, and they eventually married, causing my grandpa to cut ties with my dad. He said my grandpa never approved of my mom because of the family she came from. Apparently, my mom was of a different church, and he was this real old-school traditional German guy and never approved of it. My dad distanced himself after that, and then they had me. Because of that, his relationship with my grandma suffered. I don't remember ever going to my grandma's until after my grandpa passed away when I was about 11, and after his death, my grandma had reached out to my dad, and then we all started spending more time with her. Everything was going well. We spent Christmas and Thanksgiving at her house every year. She was the best little old lady. I couldn't fathom why my dad never had a relationship with her, or why she never reached out to my dad sooner. She seemed like the type of woman that wouldn't hurt a fly. Her joyful energy was infectious. She had the best life. She didn't take herself too seriously. She made the best cinnamon buns. Her house always smelled like fresh bread. There was something weird, though, that I noticed as we got older. If my brother asked to come over, she'd sort of refuse him, but if I asked if my brother and I could come over, she'd say yes right away. She'd even call the house and ask specifically if I was coming to visit soon. Then at Christmases, I started to notice that I was getting the bigger and better gifts. I'd even get more from her and more cash in our cards. As time passed, the peculiar pattern of favoritism from Grandma became more evident. I mean, she came to my high school graduation, but she didn't go to my brother's. She had made some excuse up about some condominium council meeting that she just had to attend. I don't know what meeting is more important than a grandson's grad, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach every time she blatantly showed her preference for me over my brother. It weighed heavily on my conscience knowing that my brother was left out in the cold while I basked in Grandma's affection and generosity. My brother even mentioned it to me on occasion, and at first, I laughed it off and said he was just jealous. But then it all started to add up. So then eventually he wouldn't come to our Christmas. He's had this longtime girlfriend, and he would go spend Christmas with her and her family. Then I noticed that she wasn't really treating my mom all that fairly either, but it was all in a really subtle way. For example, my mom would receive a generic store-bought card from Grandma while I received a heartfelt handwritten letter expressing her love and admiration for me. Or I noticed my grandma seemingly always busy when it came to a birthday dinner for my mom or my brother, but she'd drop all of her plans if it was my birthday. I even brought my girlfriend over for Christmas one year, and she got some earrings as a present from my grandma, but my brother's longtime girlfriend had never received a card, never mind a gift. Anyways, it became increasingly clear that my brother and mom were being deliberately excluded from Grandma's affections, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. One day, as I sat in Grandma's cozy kitchen, I mustered up the courage to broach the subject that had been gnawing at me for so long. Don't ask why it took me so long. Maybe I was just scared of the truth. Grandma, I can't help but notice that you treat me differently from my brother. Why is that? Well, she straight up said, "Sweetheart, it's not what you think," and just brushed it off. But her evasive answer only fueled my determination. But before I could really get into it, sadly, my grandma passed away last year. After attending her funeral, I got this call that I was summoned to meet with a lawyer. I had told my dad this, and he said that was weird. He said maybe it was just some sort of formality, but he was definitely expecting to get a call in the coming days. When I got there, it was just me and her one living sibling. Well, it was revealed that she had left behind a house worth over $800,000 and over $300,000 in cash and heirlooms and RRSPs. The inheritance was to be divided equally among the two of us, her brother and myself, representing my dad's share. I asked the lawyer if that was all. I said there had to be some mistake, and he said there wasn't a mistake. My grandma didn't leave her son with anything or my brother. I instantly felt sick to my stomach. It wasn't like she had a bad relationship with them from what I saw. She was really close to my dad. She'd call him all the time. and they'd spend a long time chatting over the phone. He'd go over there just for coffee, or to help her out with her garden, or whatever she needed help doing around the house. This just seemed wrong. I had no idea what I was going to tell my dad because I knew he'd be curious and text me later asking how it went and what it was all about. Well, sure enough, my dad texts me that night and asks if everything is okay. I called him up and told him what happened. When he learned about this, he protested and questioned how it could be possible. I said I didn't know. He said something is wrong here and demanded for the lawyer's contact information. So naturally, I gave it to him because I couldn't explain it any better than I was. I didn't know any better than he did. A few days later, I get a call from the same lawyer, and he's asking me to come in. I thought I was going to get in trouble for handing out his contact information, but when I got there, he gave me a letter written by my grandma from about 5 years ago. Apparently, this letter was to be read to me and me alone after her death. In this letter, she explained why my grandpa had completely disowned my dad and why she wasn't including her son and my brother in her inheritance. She revealed to me that my brother's biological father is, in fact, not my dad. She said my dad met my mom, and my mom cheated on him early on in their relationship, ended up getting pregnant by someone else. But my dad knew all of this and still went ahead and married her. After my brother was born, she said they knew all about the cheating and the infidelity and tried to warn my dad that if he went ahead and married my mom, that they'd cut him out of their will and subsequently any kids that my mom and dad would have, including the child that isn't even his aka my brother. She said that my grandpa wouldn't allow my grandma to speak to her boy, even though she desperately missed him and wanted to. Thus, their relationship collapsed. She said they were trying to prove a point to him by cutting him out and thus sacrificed having a relationship with me. She specifically said me. She didn't mention my brother. This also meant that my dad wasn't included in any of their business affairs. They used to own a bunch of car washes. She said that originally my dad was to inherit these, but they sold them before my grandpa died just to spite him. They cut him out of everything. She said that my brother's dad was some guy named Philip that my mom went to church with. So I guess the different church thing was sort of true. She said that she never trusted my mom after that and couldn't forgive her for hurting her baby like that. And she said that once I came along and she finally met me, it brought back all of those years of guilt. And she said that she wanted to love me and give me everything that she had missed out on. She said that it was like her second chance at having a son. But she said that every time she looked at my brother, she was reminded of my mom's infidelity and trickery. She said she had made a promise to my grandpa to never speak to us, but that she couldn't not speak to me or be in my life. But the cost of that was in turn breaking her promise to her husband. The letter said that at the time my brother didn't know that our dad isn't his biological father. So then I thought, does he still not know? Should I tell him? Why would my grandma suddenly leave this for me? Now, help update 1. Okay, so the comments were telling me that I have to tell my brother. A lot has happened, so here we go. I really wrestled with the weight of knowing what I knew. I debated for a few days, and I actually lost a lot of sleep over this. If he didn't already know, I thought it could potentially rip apart the fabric of his reality and shatter the image he had of our family. Either way, I decided I was going to share my inheritance with my brother and my dad. First off, I was going to meet up with my dad and tell him about the letter and tell him that I knew what happened. I decided to call my dad over to my place so that I could chat with him without my mom walking in. I ended up telling him about the contents of the letter and asked him why he decided to stay with my mom. He said he was aware of my mom's infidelity but chose to stay because he loved her regardless of the circumstances of my brother's birth. He assured me that he had accepted my brother as his own from the moment he held him in his arms and would continue to do so no matter what. He said that despite his parents cutting him off because of that and trying to make a point and teach him a lesson, they had actually taught him to give people second chances. After my mom got pregnant with my brother, she was disowned from her family who were hella religious because she had premarital sex. He said my mom had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, and he couldn't just leave her like that. He said, "Your mother made a mistake, but I chose to see beyond that mistake and embrace the challenge of raising a family with her." And he said they worked on their relationship really hard after that and worked on trust. And he said they still go to couples therapy every now and again, but that her loyalty has unwavered ever since, and she's paid for that mistake every time my grandma looked her in the eyes. I asked him if my brother knew. and he said that he doesn't. I told him that I was going to speak to my mom and that I was going to give them a week to tell him before I tell him. I said if they don't tell him, I'm not going to split my inheritance with him and my brother. Then he sort of got pissed at me and said that it's not my secret to tell, and he said that it's technically not my inheritance. I maintain that he is 7 days, and I don't get confirmation from him that my mom and him told my brother, then I'd be splitting my inheritance with only my brother. Then he tried to tell me that I had no right to meddle in their family affairs and threatened to withhold inheritance as a means of coercion. He emphasized that it was their responsibility to handle the situation with my brother, not mine. He warned me of the potential consequences of interfering in such a delicate matter and urged me to reconsider my stance. But despite my dad's objections, I told him I said what I said. Well, within that week, he texted me and tried to get me to reconsider. He tried to say that it would be too shocking for my brother to find out by me. He said my brother would be devastated, and I said, yeah, he's going to be devastated, and it is a lot to process, but he deserves to know and he deserves to hear it from you. So that's why I'm giving you the time and the opportunity to tell him. Then I said that my mom isn't ready to tell him, and I said why not. He said that she was afraid that my brother will disown her, and she doesn't want to risk losing that relationship. I said, that wasn't my problem. He pleaded with me to understand her perspective and give her more time to come to terms with it before involving my brother. The next day, my mom comes over to my place. I could tell she was crying. I tell her, she's got 2 days to figure it out. She tried to plead with me, and I said, why is it such a bad secret? My dad will always be dad. Philip was never in his life, she said. Please don't take her mistakes out on him, she pleaded. I said, how am I taking them out on him? I'll be telling him the truth. I said, if you tell him, Dad gets this chunk of money that he can choose to share with you. If you don't tell him, it all goes to my brother. She said, it's not about the money. She said, it's not an easy secret to bear, and I've wrestled with the guilt of it every day. But please understand that it's not about hiding the truth from your brother to protect myself. It's about protecting him from the pain and confusion that revelation might bring. I just maintained my position and told her she had 2 days to do the right thing. She called me greedy and said I was being selfish and just wanted to keep the money for myself. Then I said, how am I being selfish if I'm literally willing to give my dad and my brother a share of my inheritance? She said that it didn't belong to me. They said if I go ahead and tell my brother that they'd go after me legally for how the estate is being administered. I said, sure, go ahead. Right after that, I went ahead and called the lawyer I've been dealing with, and he said that they don't have anything. He said, it's literally written in her hand, and she has a letter addressed to me that my dad has no right to anything. They're just talking out of there. It says essentially, well, I got a call and text from each of them for the next 2 days, pleading for me not to say anything. The day finally came, and I told my brother to meet me at our family home. He pulls up, and we go inside, and our parents are sitting in the kitchen on their phones. Well, their jaws dropped, and I told my brother right then that my parents had something to tell him. He looked confused, and my dad got up from his chair and threatened me. I said, this is your last chance, and he said, don't do this. Then I told my brother to sit down, and I went ahead and told him everything. I even gave him the letter that Grandma had written. He listened to me. He looked at me in shock, devastated, and my heart broke for him. My mom tried to speak, but my brother cut her off, his voice shaky as he asked how they could lie to him his whole life. My mom began to cry, apologizing profusely and trying to justify her actions, but my brother wasn't having it. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over in the process, and told them that he needed some time alone to process everything. He walked out to the front of the house. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I just walked out too. We sat there on the lawn just crying together, and I told him that I was going to share my inheritance with him. I know that he's been struggling, and he wants to start up his own business and get married to his longtime girlfriend. They want to buy a house and start a family, and the amount that I would receive is far too much for one person. I'll keep you posted if anything significant happens. Thanks for listening. Update 2. Honestly, I've been thinking, and I really believe that my grandma didn't want me to just keep the money. I think she only wrote me and her brother in the will because she was trying to keep a promise to her deceased husband. I think she held on to the letter because she knew that I'd do the right thing with the money at the right time. I did give half of what I got to my brother. He's currently in the process of purchasing his first home with his fiancée. My dad tried to actually open up a lawsuit, but it was tossed out. My brother isn't currently speaking to them. The only communication I've had with them was legally, but even then it was through a third party. Anyways, that's where we're at. But yeah, I'd like to think that my grandma maybe had a change of heart towards the end and felt really awful for how she treated my brother. I hope the money he received can somehow make up for all of that. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Caught my wife cheating with my best friend after she falsely accused me for years. The pictures I took while they slept made her beg for mercy. I, 28, male, recently divorced my ex-wife, 5, female, after 2 years of marriage. The first time I met my wife was in college. I was ahead of her in class, and shortly after, we became friends. I graduated, but my wife and I kept in touch. Fortunately, things went smoothly for me, and I was able to get a good-paying job months after I graduated from college. By this time, my wife and I had gotten closer, and occasionally I would support her financially so she could take care of things she needed to. Even though we were not dating, we got intimate, and it was more of a friends with benefits relationship. But as time passed, I fell in love with her, and we were officially dating in no time. While we dated, our relationship had a lot of ups and downs, and I should have considered this a red flag, but because I was deeply in love with her, I thought my influence would rub off on her, and she would change with time. I wasn't the kind of boyfriend who always fought or argued, but my wife was. She argued about everything, including the ones that should not have led to an argument. She was more of a defensive person and was never wrong, even though she was always at fault. Eventually, we dated for 2 years after breaking up a couple of times, and later on, we married. Aside from her defensive nature and inability to control her anger, my wife was a good person. She took care of me, satisfied my needs, and took care of our home too. She was also good with money management, which was the one skill I didn't have. In the first year of our marriage, something happened that almost scattered our marriage. So, there was this female colleague of mine that I was close to. We used to have lunch together, and most times I would drop her at her home after work. But my wife never liked this idea. She knew my colleague well, and no matter how I tried to explain to her that there was nothing between my colleague and me, she wouldn't listen. One day, after work, I offered to drop a few of my colleagues at the bus station like I usually did, and this female friend of mine opted to sit in front with me. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my wife jumped out from where she was, hiding, and assaulted my female colleague. She created a terrible scene at my workplace, and I was almost fired because of her actions. My wife badly injured my female colleague, and she even had her hair pulled out. Ultimately, I had to pay all the hospital bills and beg my colleague not to press charges. That was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, and even after I went home to confront my wife, she showed no remorse. She claimed she knew I was cheating on her and called me all kinds of names. I didn't understand where all that was coming from because I had never cheated on her, not even when we were dating. I tried my best to remain faithful, but at the slightest opportunity she had, she would accuse me of cheating on her. It didn't just end there. She invaded my privacy all the time. I would often wake up to see her going through my phone, and if I yelled at her, she would hand me her phone and say I could go through it too. For 2 years, I tolerated all that, thinking that my wife acted that way because she was insecure and didn't want another woman to snatch me from her because she loved me so much. I didn't know she had been steadily cheating on me and fooling me the whole time. Also, when she handed me her phone so I could go through it, I didn't go through it because I believed she had nothing to hide. Meanwhile, she had skeletons in her closet. The kind of work I did included traveling from time to meet with my clients, and each time I announced to my wife that I would be traveling soon, it always led to a fight. The main reason it always led to a fight was that my wife claimed I barely spent time with her, and she didn't like that I had to travel all the time. So, the last time I traveled, this was before I discovered how much of a hypocrite she was. I wrapped up what I had to do with my client a day earlier, and I decided to go home and surprise my wife since she wasn't so happy that I traveled. When I got home, the house was quiet, but I noticed a pair of sneakers in my living room that wasn't mine, and as I walked down the corridor, I saw a shirt just outside our bedroom door. Our bedroom was slightly shut, and as I opened to see what was going on, I saw my wife and my closest college friend in bed together. They were both naked and all cuddled up, and they were both deeply asleep and snoring, indicating that they just did it. Gez, I was so shocked and heartbroken, and I could not believe that my wife, who accused me several times of cheating on her when I was innocent, was actually cheating on me with my friend. At that moment, I wanted to hit the hell out of them, but I realized that doing that would only add salt to the injury. So, I took out my phone and took several pictures of them and left the house while they slept. I sent their pictures to my wife's family WhatsApp group chat and sent them to our close circle of friends and even the people who knew my college friend. By the time they woke up, almost everyone I knew and they knew had their pictures, and they sent them a lot of angry messages. Shortly after, my wife realized what was happening. She called me to ask if I had received any pictures from any number, and I told her I gave her up that evening to take her things and leave my house. When I said that, she knew I was the one. And instead of being all defensive like I expected her to be, she started begging me on the phone. She said it wasn't what I thought and that she could not explain how it happened, but I didn't fall for anything she said. After I sent my friends the pictures, some of them began to tell me they knew about my wife's infidelity. I was so shocked that some of my friends knew my wife and friend were cheating on me but never said anything. I was so angry, and I blocked them and cut them off completely. As for my wife, she begged me to not make any decision that would destroy our marriage, despite destroying it with her infidelity. I had grown weary of her manipulation and swiftly filed for divorce without hesitation. As previously mentioned, I wish to emphasize that certain women do not merit the sacrifices men offer them. It remains challenging to comprehend that throughout my efforts to be a devoted spouse, my wife had been unfaithful since our first year of marriage, a fact I remained oblivious to. While consistently portraying me negatively, she was engaging in an affair with my friend right under my nose. Regarding him, I severed all connections and now consider him as good as dead to me, along with those friends who witnessed my wife's infidelity yet remained silent. I have firmly resolved never to enter into matrimony again. The turmoil and strife associated with marriage render it not worthwhile, and it is preferable to embrace the freedom of singlehood rather than be bound to a deceitful and manipulative spouse.